Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and I am back here today with my good friend, Zachary Fader. We're going to go into part 2 of what he calls maps of consciousness. So if you watched the first episode, which was last week around this time, we laid out, well, Zachary talks about how do we get to the deep essential truths. And the first level that I want to touch upon and review is that we don't have to go into too much because we did in the first program, that everyone is traumatized on deep levels of their conscious, their subconscious, and their soul. And we have to get through that to really understand who we are as spiritually divine beings. Is that what you would say, Zachary?
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome everybody to this wonderful place that we're in. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's kind of a true, stark, deep reality that we're only starting to really get to grips with. And where it really comes into place, I think, a good maybe opener for us is just the simple fact of what's going on globally and has been for a long time. We don't agree on basic facts. I mean, that's
what about, like what? No, like what do you can't just throw that. You have to just say what you mean by that.
Well, look at our entire political process. It's utterly polarized around, essentially some various truths that both sides believe with all of their will. And I think we actually see that in families too, because I see it in my practice all the time. Families come together with a difference of opinion about basic historical facts of what took place yesterday afternoon. This is very common. And so on the one hand, right, we don't agree with facts. On the other hand, we actually don't really get along yet. We still really don't. I mean, we're trying. But one thing that the digital revolution
humans don't get along. Humans are not getting along with each other. We're human beings, and we don't know how to get along. We don't have really good social skills as a species. I mean, somewhat.
Sure.
We built cities and we built things, of course, on the backs of slave labor, probably, or underpaid workers. But tell me what else you mean by this.
Well, it's kind of interesting to look at let's say the digital revolution and the social media revolution. Prior to that, we might have thought we were actually getting along pretty well. And then suddenly the comments section of every website and YouTube video suddenly appeared, and we realized actually we're still furious and very upset and ready to project it at any angle, but once again, prior to that, we were kind of, that veneer of the madman and the Stepford wife, able to kind of, as long as I'm mowing my lawn outside and my fancy towels in the bathroom are all in place, I can kind of maintain this kind of facade that I'm actually okay and everything's going well. And so the digital revolution really kind of proved what was going on inside of all of us. And so for me, I kind of start there because it's just a stark reminder of what we're still struggling with all up and down the hierarchy, right? That it's difficult for us to make sense of things.
Well, name that. You have to just name those things we're struggling with. You just can't say we're all struggling. You have to get really down to the specifics and say, what are the things we're struggling with?
Well, we can't agree on climate change, for example.
Well, let's say, I think no. Let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we can agree on climate change. There's just a lot of corporate greed that wants to hold on to their profits. I mean, any intelligent person will see. So is it that we can't agree, or is that there are sociopaths out there that don't care about the collective?
Well, So
mean,
this is where we get to the map, right? Like, why are sociopaths out there? Why are sociopaths in this
right.
culture incentivized to actually be sociopaths? Because there's a total incentive regimen that goes pretty much from the cradle to the grave to encourage you to choose yourself over me. And we see that in corporate structures. We see that in relationships. We see that in essentially the zero-sum game that we've created, since the Industrial Revolution. So there's a lot you can get for yourself, a lot of benefit you can have if you step over my body. And that again, where does that come from? Right? It's not just these structures in society.
Where does that come from? But I think you're getting to the bottom. Where does that come from? Because that's the bottom line. You're getting towards the bottom line. Where does that come from? The greed of corporate culture, which we're all a part of, which we all, what is that word when you're helping an addict do their thing? We're enabling corporate culture because we're a part of it and we think we can't live without it. And maybe we can, but who's going to take the chance of getting off the grid? I mean, some people, well, you have, but anyway, so go back to that core thing about where we learn, or where does corporate culture, it's a little outdated term, learn that behavior of just me, not you.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things that really gets to the core also of the necessity for a map for consciousness, something that we teach right alongside reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I'll explain it, but for most people out there, we got to be really clear about this. This isn't just going to be explained in a couple of sound bites, right? The digital culture actually has no real way to actually incorporate this because it's long form. It actually requires, it's as much information, I would say, and I use it as an analogy to understand, once again, how to drive a car. So if you can drive a car and you took the time to learn, not to fix a car, not to kind of disassemble a car and put it back together, just to drive one, then you have the requisite skills to really understand your consciousness. But it takes as much time and concentrating and training just to understand at the rudimentary levels. And I'm going to answer your question here, Alan.
Wait. It's pretty easy to learn how to drive a car. I think it takes more skill and training to understand consciousness. I mean, that's just my
it's
feeling.
a little more, but I would say it's not that much different. And I think one of the reasons why, at least this would be my proposal, right? One of the reasons you might say, understandably, it takes a little more time is because it hasn't been presented very easily. And we've had to go to India and other places. Right. We've had to piecemeal the whole thing together from this master who also abused his students.
They don't know anything in India, I have to say. I mean, their view, and I mean, of course, there's some great Indian teachers, but they don't know anything more than we do about consciousness, because a lot of meditation and practices in whatever spiritual tradition is about escape from the world. And I think you're talking about embracing the world. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, great point. So to answer your question of where does all this come from, right? Yeah. And I'll just give a kind of a...
How do we fix it?
So I won't go into the details, but I'm answering your question just by touching upon the map for a moment. Now, the way that I outline this map that seems to have worked for a lot of different patients over the years and clients and other individuals, and that takes from a lot of great people who are out there doing good work, but synthesizes it, is that in consciousness, in the psyche, we've got parts like a steering wheel, like windshield wipers, right? Like a stick shift. We've got systems, okay? Higher level, we've got systems, transmission, GPS, right? The air conditioning, exactly. You need good air conditioning, especially now. And then most importantly, which is where we're going to start answering that question you're talking about, how is this whole incentivization to be sociopathic and zero sum, how has that gripped the entire, world for God knows how long? Parts, systems, processes. Now there are endogenous, which is to say processes that are literally native to the human psyche. Processes like that are
what? You have to name them. You have to be specific about processes.
You can't jump the gun. We gotta pan it out one step at a time. So I give you the
Okay,
most, let's
okay,
say the
because
most
a lot of
common.
times people throw out concepts. Go ahead, go ahead. No, I'm just
Yes,
saying a lot of times people throw out concepts, processes, and they think people know what they're talking about. But
let's
no, go
double
ahead,
click.
please.
I'm gonna double
Okay.
click into it. I know that that means absolutely nothing. It's just, kind of a placeholder for like a quadruple click, right? And so let's dive into what we actually mean by that. For me, I'll give you an example. The most common process that very, very few, if any of us, were really given as children, which is when it first begins to be required, right, is the ability to process emotion, to know how to
Right,
process emotion. Any
right.
therapist worth their salt, that's basically what they're doing, 80% of the time. Someone comes, you say, I've got this feeling, I've got this energy, it's blocked in my throat. Oftentimes they won't even say that. All they'll say is, I feel depressed. I feel
Mhm.
stuck. I feel anxious, right? What was Freud
Well,
dealing with?
that's a good point.
Hysteria.
So because people don't know how to process their emotion as a young child, and I think children act out for first of all, and it's a source of addiction because I'm not feeling good. I think I'll eat something, or maybe later take a drug or alcohol that will make me feel better, or I'll act out on somebody who's in
And why?
relationship because, right?
Let's go back a little. Let's not go so
Okay,
fast, right? Let's really, really slow
okay,
that down, because we've already gone to suddenly, yeah, they're taking heroin. Absolutely, that's where it
right,
goes. But once again, there are various processes here. There are at least
right.
half a dozen
Hmm.
essential processes that none of us were really given as children. And that's perfectly normal and perfectly understandable. And no one's really to blame for that, because we're only starting to understand this. I mean, the main process that we have had probably for centuries, if not millennia, with the exception of some of the indigenous tribes that really started to work these things through with the peace pipe and the ceremony and the rites of passage. That's part of process. But the main process we've had is disassociation, which essentially, you as a child bring the process to me. I don't have the tools or the wherewithal to understand what that is. You're just aggravating me. So I interrupt your process. I totally interrupt it and I say, suck it up, pull up your bootstraps, shut up, disassociate. Now, I'm not also kind of putting disassociate out the window. Disassociation is essential in this world. We have to be strong. There are certain moments. Well, there are certain moments for healthy disassociation. Otherwise, you're going to be, just this kind of wet, oversensitive individual that just can't actually take anything. And you're going to be very non-resilient. So disassociation to a certain healthy degree, you got to understand there's certain moments. It's like if a tiger is approaching you, if you start to get all oversensitive around that tiger, you're going to get eaten. You need to be able to disassociate, pump that adrenaline, step into fight, push it out of your awareness, and grab your sword, right? And there are many moments in life when that's absolutely essential. When that becomes the dominant
But,
mode
but
of
but
work.
you know what? They're very few. There are those, yes, we need to take action, but in the scope of human relationships, I think there are very few of those moments of disassociating, because I don't want you to make a case for disassociation, because that's our
Well,
epidemic.
it is an epidemic, but we need to appreciate it because that's what's got us this far. Like we're standing on the shoulders of that, I see we can go into that a lot, Alan. I don't want to get sidetracked by it, but I see what you're saying, and trust me, I'm certainly not saying, I'm not holding the flag up for disassociation. I'm saying there are certain moments when you need to stand your ground in a certain situation, and it's really important to disassociate that inner child that's weeping because you got beaten when you were 4 years old, right? If you bring that into the situation, saying I'm feeling really oversensitive and I was beaten over, I mean, the whole situation is going to become much more complex, and it's going to be much more difficult to actually get where we need to go. It's important to be able to be strong, and certainly as men. And I will say,
Yes.
that is, one of the things that everyone is talking about these days around the crisis of masculinity, right? It's true. On the one hand, men disassociate too much. On the other, we actually, a lot of men, I'm not going to say all men, but a lot of men have difficulty stepping into that emotional processing in the first place.
Wait,
Right?
the crisis of masculinity, I haven't heard that one. I didn't know there was a crisis. I mean, I know there's a crisis in understanding identity in particular for women and men. They each have their own issues, but yeah, I guess you could call it a crisis in masculinity and femininity because, but yes, different, of course, but okay. So I'm with you. So disassociation is okay, but you're not telling me.
So here, let's get back
Yeah,
to the
go
process, right? The process
ahead. Okay,
is
yes, yes.
the child, by the time the child is in the womb, essentially, but certainly at 1 year old, at 2 years old, at 3 years old, at 4 years old, the child looks to the parent to complete the healthy sequence within various processes. So one of the processes would be, I'm experiencing emotions. Can you help me cycle through this sequence? Right? Another process, because I know this is a spiritual channel, would be essentially the connection to something. Well, it is, let's be fair.
Whatever.
The connection to something greater than ourselves, right? The child, you can see
Right.
this when you have a child, that they look to you, and there are certain moments where they're afraid and they're looking, and they don't really have any idea that they're doing this, but they're kind of patting you to see, is there a place in you that is existentially secure? Right? So they're looking to you saying, do you have a place that is actually even greater than just your body and your little tiny little self in this rollicking storm of life? And can I feel into that? And can you give me that transmission? And there are, so that's just two,
Right.
right? Let's just say the connection to something greater that is embedded in a place of peace, a place of security, regardless of the horrors that surround us in life. And then the sequence of processing emotion. And there are several others we can go into. You could say there's like the deeper one of emotion is, let's say, somatic descent, right? That would be a term for it, where it's something really deep is going on. And it's not just an emotion that's on the surface here. This is a trauma that you have not dealt with, right? And we have to be able to navigate inside that, to go to the core of it, to untangle it, and to bring the sequence to resolution.
Right. I think I don't want, yes, we talked about that, but let's just stay with the baseline of what you're presenting here. The source of a lot of our problems as children and of course into adults
says I can't
is
do
not
it.
being, is what?
The parent says I can't do it. The parent doesn't even know that sequence is being invited or being asked for. And the parent says, I can't do it. So the parent says,
Right.
it's okay.
I just wanted to define it again. So the big problem is not knowing how to deal with our emotions. And you're saying the parent, unaware, incapable, out of touch, says, I can't help you, fix yourself, or leave me alone. Or
do what I've done. Now, if you're 3 years old, you can't go to the bar, you can't take a drink, you can't go on a video game, you can't shout at someone on road rage, you can't do any of these things. But the most essential piece is that the parent is saying, I've never been educated in how to complete this sequence. So the child comes to us requiring us to complete a sequence that they're in the midst of. And we say, I can't do it. I can't do it. So we have to interrupt the sequence. And then when the sequence is interrupted, the child naturally has to find a way to synthetically complete the sequence, so to speak. They can't actually.
They never do that.
No, well, they repress, they act out. That's when they start to act out. That's when you start to see them kind of playing with their dollies, and they're like, what's her name's not doing so well, and she's a bad girl, and we're going to throw her over there. There you've seen, suddenly it starts to repeat itself.
Yes.
It's a self-iterative process.
Okay, I think we all know the problem. So what do you suggest to deal with early childhood wounds and parents that don't
I want to connect it. If it's okay with you, I want to connect it to, like, let's say, the incentivized corporate structure that encourages us.
Oh yeah, yes,
right?
yes. Of course, that's okay. That's yes.
Because for me, this is actually the most important thing. The most important thing is to understand why a map of consciousness is so important. Because if we just kind of laid it all out in front of you, it's like saying a steering wheel is really important. Steering wheel's not important. It's like saying a gear shift is really important. You need to really know your transmission. You'd be like, I don't need to know my transmission. I need to know how to get to A to B. That's the process. That's the process. No one comes, into my practice and says, I really want to understand, like, my inner child. They don't say that. They say, I've got an uncomfortable sensation and I need to bring it to resolution. That's a process. And the only reason they come is because I've tried doing that with my career, the Sisyphusian ascent, right? Remission. I've tried doing it with gaming. I've tried it with women. I've tried it with drugs. And so once again, all of these are the indirect, you could call them synthetic, right? Societally created supplies that society has offered to the child that arrives in society saying, I have a demand for these sequences to be completed. And I don't know how to do them. My parents don't have them. So will you give me away? And society says, yeah, let's monetize that. Let's monetize that. So we'll get you in the corporate structure. And every single time you get a raise, you're going to get a little bit of a hit that maybe that sequence is being addressed. It'll never truly address it at the root, but it'll give you just a good enough taste to want to get the next one. And we have that in the pharmaceutical industry with stimulants, depressants, painkillers, hallucinogens. It's kind of interesting, right? Each of those actually, you can map all of those onto processes that are endogenous to the human psyche that are completely unable to be resolved, right? So let's say if you can't have an access to, let's say, the divine, you'll take hallucinogens, right? It's a great way of doing it. If you don't have access, if you've never been ushered into a way of seizing your mission in life, that sequence where you're on mission, you wake up in the morning, you know, lots of people used to say, Paul Lowe used to say this, you wake up in the morning, you have a yes. You wake up, do you wake up with a yes or do you wake up with a no? Beautiful. So it's so simple, right? That's a sequence. If you're not on mission, you're probably going to take some stimulants. If we're talking about the pharmaceutical monetized version of it. You know,
right.
if you don't
I get that, but let's talk about resolving the issues of how someone does that with their child or even with themselves if they're still acting out or still a corporate destroying the earth because they want to make money off of destroying the rainforest. You know, I mean, let's talk to those people.
So from this perspective, I wouldn't say that they're wanting to destroy the rainforest. I would say that they're actually just trying to heal themselves, and that's the result of the synthetic completion of the process. Right?
Well, that's much more compassionate way of putting it. Yes,
I think if you confronted anyone who, you know, essentially is part of the abuse of the planet, right? This would be another loggerhead conversation. You wouldn't get anywhere. Right? They would be saying that they're actually helping all the individuals who actually need jobs and who need food on their table. And, you know, we can't afford to have all this stuff. Like a tree is beautiful, but there are people dying. And do you really want to save trees over people? I mean, that's the kind of conversation you would get embedded in. And I think it's totally uninformed. Right. It's totally uninformed in the idea. I actually see, so I just want, let me just back up for a second. And I want to make this connection because I want to see if you like it. We're going to test drive it here. We're going to see if you like it. These incomplete processes, right? So if I can't emotionally process and I need to, let's say, constantly be getting a raise and constantly be dominating people in business meeting, let's say, to feel that emotional process of being honored and appreciated by my mother, by my father, that I never got as a child. It's Sisyphusian, right? This old myth of Sisyphus that is constantly pushing the boulder up and it gets pushed back down. What you realize is this is a process of externalization, right? It's creating collateral damage. It's never actually solving the problem, but it's constantly being perpetuated and having to actually perpetuate, it's having to metastasize over and over again. So I see this initial element with children that takes place. If you scale it up all the way to the societal level, we have capitalism. Because what is capitalism?
Yes, and we have what somebody just called in the chat line, Agenda 21, United Nations Depopulation Agenda, Poor First. I mean, we have that. I mean, that's another manifestation of that same thinking.
even overpopulation, and this is a very inflammatory thing I'll say, but I can kind of say it with a lot of compassion, but I think it's pretty well accepted that a lot of us, as a result of this very thing that we're talking about, will have children, because children actually support a displacement of your own trauma. You bring kids
Right.
into a family unit and the trauma gets spread out. So it actually feels great to have kids. And if
I
you
know
work,
it does. That's another form of the alcohol that numbs the process. But I have to say, I don't think we really have an overpopulation problem. I think that's a
you've always,
separate issue, but it's a myth. I mean, you ever fly over the US, these vast areas, totally empty. I'm not
yeah,
saying we should fill that, but what we have is an energy problem to turn those deserts and unusable land into flowering farmlands. The
yeah.
population is not the problem. It's again goes back to the greed of the companies that want to stop us from free energy. But that's another conversation. But I want to hear the answer to this, what you're
No,
digging at.
yeah. And I've always appreciated, you've always held that line, and I've always agreed with you actually on that one. Um, I, I agree with you. We don't need to cull the herd, but I think where overpopulation, for me, just to at least finish on that piece, is an issue, is the overpopulation of traumatized children. We don't need more traumatized children. That's
Well,
really a difficult thing.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying. People have children a lot of times because they don't want to feel their own pain. Look, they can give it to someone else who will then meet their needs, that will then perpetuate the trauma. Yeah, we need a whole re-education of the global population in dealing with what you're kind of putting your finger on, dealing with our pain, dealing
It's
with
and it starts, and so to answer, to go back to what we're saying here, it goes back to that first moment when the child looks to the parent and is essentially saying, can you usher me through this process? Can you usher me through my fear? Can you usher me through my existential pain? I have a knot, I have an emotional knot right here. Do you know how to untangle emotional knots? And if the parent knows how to do that, you have a happy kid. You have a resilient kid. The problem is that most of us are so busy. This whole issue has gone so far and so extreme that we have a resentment to even doing that. And I see this in families all the time. I even feel parts of it in my own self, that most of us who are parents, we're still retroactively healing our own inner children. And so when our actual child comes along, it's almost as if we were trying to say to them, will you just get in line? Because there's another kid already here who was here before you were, and I got to deal with him first. And everything that you're bringing up is triggering him as well. Right? So we have to actually take the time to actually go into it and actually usher kids through processes. And this is one of the things that I have seen in my practice since the beginning. And I brought lots of different things to my practice, thinking they were going to be silver bullets or really exciting. And it wasn't true, Alan. That's like the funniest thing. People want to be ushered through processes. And I've seen this as maps of consciousness.
Well, give us something. Okay, I still haven't heard address this. You've stated the problem. We have this issue of dealing with our emotions. We project it onto feelings or this or what someone said in the chat, Jesus will protect, all these religions and ideas and substitutes for our own pain, feeling ourselves. So give us a process or tell us how to get to the bottom of it, or give us a solution.
Well, here's the thing, right? We can talk about that, but I want to be clear. It's like when we got on the call originally, you mentioned this before. Why don't we just throw it out on the floor? And working therapeutically, I started to realize why, for example, the great mystic, sage, magician Milarepa. If you read the story of Milarepa, it's kind of a hilarious story. He goes to Marpa, who becomes his teacher, and Marpa just is just a cantankerous old bastard, quite frankly, and says to him, you want the oral transmission? Yeah, build me a stone hut over here. Milarepa does it. And then Marpa, comes back like, 3 weeks later and says, "Hey, it's not so bad, but it's not in the right spot. I think you need to take it down and put it over here." And this goes on like 5 or 6 times. And every time Marpa comes back and, "Did I say it was over there? I was a little bit drunk at the time. Why don't we put it over here?" And he basically
Right.
breaks
So he
Milarepa down.
builds the house. He takes it down. He builds it again. He does that 5 or 6 and yeah. Okay.
And Milarepa's just weeping like, this is ridiculous. He's breaking him down. And you realize that there's a reason why they make it so difficult to get really important knowledge, is because of spiritual materialism, right? Because, and what spiritual
Oh,
materialism is if you
I
give
think.
me,
Wait. Go ahead. Go ahead.
if
Say
you
it.
give,
Go because
if you, well, go ahead.
No, I think you're saying just give me the answer. I don't have to do it because I know the answer. So boom, I got it. What's next? What's the next punchline? Yeah.
Right.
So
And
yes.
what actually happens is the pathological side, just like capitalism does the same with all esoteric wisdom. It simply sucks it into its consumeristic generating, effluvium, and monetizes it to buttress its existing pathological self. Right? So this is the old story of the ego. The ego will basically say, "Give me the wisdom, just say it in a tagline, and then I can use it not to actually die and be reborn and transform into a new iteration, but I'll simply use it to buttress my existing state." Because the truth is, I actually really don't want to transform. All I want is to be enlightened, but just as I am now. I want to be exactly the same as I am now, just with the
Right.
perfect one-liner to everything in a bliss state. But please don't make me change in any way, shape, or form. That's why
Right.
Marpa.
You're showing me how much of a you're showing me how much of a spiritual materialist I really am. Thank
Well,
you.
you and me both,
Because
Alan.
I've collected all these well, look at the books, all these ideas, and here I am still with myself, which is okay. I'm happy, more happier now than ever, but still we're all spiritual materialists until we do the work of dropping into our pain, really dropping into our discomfort.
And I'm right there with you, Alan. I'm as much of a spiritual materialist as the next guy. I mean, I love the material and I read it and I lap it up as well. The reason why I hesitate, because this is, I think, one of the things, and you rightfully called me on it. You said, you're kind of hesitant. Why are you hesitant just to kind of pan the whole thing out? And there's a reason for that. And it's important. I'm glad you asked it, because it's important to say it. Why, if you ask pretty much any transpersonal psychotherapist worth their salt, when someone comes into the room, you've been working for 40 years, you might be able to see exactly what's going on right there. But then why didn't you just say to the person, "Oh yeah, you got a father issue. Yeah, and you fusion with your mother. There you go. $100. Bye." It doesn't work.
Exactly.
It doesn't work. And that might be the answer. That might be the perfect zinger of like, "Oh yeah, you're totally fused with your inner feminine and you're not able to get over it." The person would never come back and nothing would be learned. And in fact, more trauma would have taken place. So what has to happen is that the therapist has to sit there and think to themselves, "Okay, I get it. Now I have to really slow down and go through this incredibly laborious process," essentially repeating what Marpa did with Milarepa. Going to this place where they're able to slowly go through a process that is slow, that is time consuming, that actually completely undercuts the desire to get to that finish line. Because the desire to get to the finish line is this thing it's actually going to undermine the entire process. And at the same time, I'm still happy to go to the finish line with you, Alan. Like, let's go there, let's do that. But allow me my hesitation, simply because I've seen how going too quickly, I won't use the phrase pearls to swine, but it undermines the wisdom in a really deep way. Kind of banalizes it.
It's just looking at the chat saying, "I'm just a little guy asking a question. How do we know we'll be back here if we don't transform? Is that a belief? How do we establish truth from stories to help inspire people?" I think that's a little off the mark, a little bit. I mean, there's something there, but
I like the question, how
Um,
do we establish truth? I think that
yeah,
that comes back to what I think, which is, so I'll use a couple of big words here because this is really important. I think it's true. How do we establish truth? Like we can't agree on anything. I think as a nation, for at least just start there, we're not able to agree on the simple path forward. Now, what's really interesting about that is that's epistemology, right? To use a big
mm,
word, epistemology is, how do you know anything? How do you actually, what are the ways in which we actually establish that we know something or we know something to be true? That's epistemology. That is like one of the most foundational aspects of science, that is just like mind-blowingly foundational. And we're not good at doing it. We're like really not, we're like epistemologically handicapped. Why a
right,
map of consciousness is so important is because I don't actually think anymore. And I didn't know this. I mean, it took me a long time to really understand this because these are kind of mind-boggling problems. We can't do epistemology well until we've actually done phenomenology well. So phenomenology is your
and
inner world.
explain that.
So phenomenology is your inner world, right? How can you actually see what's out there if you haven't observed the lens through which you're seeing it? So that's there was like deep insight in that question of like, how do we know truth? Yeah, you're right. It's important to know truth. Now, are we going to really understand capital T truth? Well, there's like a ton. I mean, there's like libraries upon libraries of like that which we do not understand and may never understand. But there are a few pretty
Right.
foundational things within relationships, within ourselves, that we can. And the only way we're going to get there is if we start with the self. I'll give you one more example to this to make it really simple. I really see that what we've done in society is we've got some bugs in our central processing unit. And we're not willing to go back and address those. So all we're doing is adding more apps on top of, and we're upgrading and upgrading and upgrading, and the bugs keep showing up in the system. And at this point in time, you know what we're doing? We're kind of basically having shouting matches with like the tech support. We're suing tech support for every single
For,
app that we've got. And we're not willing to go back to realize that actually there's some foundational bugs in the motherboard and the fatherboard, and the central processing unit. And that's what keeps getting reiterated. That's phenomenology.
okay, but let's get back to your central
Sure.
point. Also, the people in the chat are just kind of talking without even understanding. One guy says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. It means nothing to the person carrying water. It's just a lot of what you call spiritual materialism, I would say. Know everything you know, no thing you know everything. All this is chatter that is meaningless. It's spiritual gibberish. It's things that the mind repeats because it's exactly the form of spiritual materialism you're talking about. I'll say something that Buddha said, and therefore I'll be, I'll think I'm wise without going to the depth of what that feeling is. Because when you go to the depth of that feeling, like my conversation with Paul O, there's nothing to say. You can't say chop wood, carry water, because you don't even know what water is in that higher state. It's just, this is a symptom of the pablum of the indulgence of the new age. And I'm totally with you on that. So that's why I want to go back to your basic statement in this conversation, which is the sublimation of true depth feeling. And but the other thing I want to say to you, we're not doing therapy, so you can give us the punchline. We'll take it or leave it, because we're not going to spend 5 weeks building the house and tearing it down. I mean, we could, but I mean, it's okay. That's better pablum than the old pablum of chopping wood through water. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree with you, Alan. With all due respect to the pablum that many of us have benefited from, everything happens for a reason. Don't be a finger pointing at the moon, be the moon. I mean, it's just like, it goes on and on, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And
we
I
can
will
repeat
say,
it endlessly. it means less and less the more you say it. That's what's so
It's become
frustrating about the
cliche.
spiritual culture. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say this was something that really plagued me early on in my own journey when you were so helpful in so many ways. When we first met, I had come out of a lot of that stuff, and I was just infuriated at how difficult it was to find a really clear step-by-step manual / path to get me to not just experience deeper parts of myself, but to understand my shadow, to go into my traumas that would actually resolve my emotional patterns and my behavioral loops and the repetitions in my relationships. And that's to get to like the punchline, and the punchline really, of course, is, I'm offering this course in a few months,
Oh,
and it's going to be, guiding people through this in a step-by-step way. But really what it's all about is addressing all the areas in which we were not met, and we have not been met, right? And that we have had no choice but to scaffold with all the ways that capitalism and consumerism is offering to us. This endless
wait. So
smorgasbord.
how were we not met? Let's name the. Let me count the ways. Let's. No, but let's enumerate them so people can identify that as part of their escape through spiritualism. Yeah. So how were we not met?
Well, we could start with some of the top trends, for example. I mean, there are, innumerable way. Every time I think that I've, seen every way that we haven't been met, someone steps into my office and I suddenly get astounded by another way that we haven't been met. But some of the biggest trends are, of course, men were not supported to enter into their vulnerability because it was beaten into submission and into profoundly defended, sophisticated ways of defending. So now men, on the whole, in a very sophisticated way, defend their vulnerability. So it doesn't actually come. Sometimes in the New Age and spiritual world, it's actually the opposite, where it's like there's an overemphasis on the sensitive male, and actually that strong male backbone has to be reintegrated into it, right? So and of course that's difficult because the pathological father, let's say, that instantiated that trauma in the first place, is connected to stepping into the masculinity. And God knows I don't want to do that because I don't want to become a bastard like him, or I don't want to be one of the corporate sociopaths. So every time we step into that, we suddenly are associated. That's the shadow, right? We're associated with all those ways in which we see pathological male raping the world. So that would be another barrier to actually stepping into full masculinity. And then on the feminine side, these would be the shadow sides of feminism, which of course is saving the world in many ways, and we appreciate it, tremendously. But one of the top trends that plague women, and certainly plagues them in the chronic illness world, is the hypermasculinization, or I should say it in a different way, the hyper overgiving, right? And I have an ebook about this it's actually called Forbidden to Receive, Compelled to Overgive. And this for me was one of the top trends that I found in chronic illness. And it plagues
say
women.
that again. Say the title of that book again is what?
So this was one of the top trends that I found in the chronic illness world, specifically for women. It was about, literally like 70 to 80% of women suffering from chronic illness suffer from this particular, psychopathology. And the ebook is kind of encapsulates it with the title, Forbidden to Receive. You're forbidden to receive, and you're compelled to overgive.
And that creates chronic illness. As you work with these, the offshoot of that is
right. And it starts in the family unit, right? And for all we know, it starts in previous iterations of lifetimes and things like that. But what we see over and over again, it starts in the family unit. And the classic model in the family unit is it starts with an absent father. It starts with an absent father, which creates a neediness, what I call a void of need on the part of the mother. And the daughter, right? It's not necessarily the first daughter, oftentimes the second, but also, so if it's an only child, it'll be her, will get suddenly drawn into the void of need of the mother. And the daughter will hyper develop her masculine in order to take the role of the father and to support the mother that is wobbling as a result of the absent father. And in so doing, disassociate her own vulnerability and her own needs, which creates this kind of massive, all-consuming, you could call it a meta program. Don't receive, because if you ask for too much, mom won't get it. If you get too much, it's a zero-sum game.
And the father is absent because they're incapable of being vulnerable. They've been, in a sense, abused for their vulnerability, so they have to prove themselves and become the corporate executive that will then make a lot of money, because that's how they feel good about themselves. And of course, then the wife is alone, the children suffer, perpetuates the cycle of then
Exactly.
not just the daughters, but the son has the absent father that then has to compensate with his own loss of masculinity to over, be that masculine father, which he never had, but he doesn't know because there's no role model. And we get programmed by stereotypes in the culture to play. And women get programmed too by stereotypes in the culture to be certain ways. And there we have the disconnected society. There we have.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. And if you kind of imagine, it's mind-boggling to think when that goes exponential.
Mm-hmm.
When that goes exponential, that's when we see the society we have. It's not just one family. It's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands and millions of families.
My complaint is we still just stated the problem. I don't think, I mean, I don't want to rush into, but we built a house, now we're tearing it down, we're building again. Okay, when do we get to move in? When do we get to?
Yeah, let's move in. Let's unpack our bags. Let's christen this new house, Alan. So the way that, for example, I would be, here's the deal, right? If you're working therapeutically with someone, all you can do is go exactly to where they need. If you try to bring out a program, no one's interested. If you're working with lots of people, you can roll them through a program, right? And it can actually be useful, and people can kind of, self-perform the rites and the rituals and the practices, and it can take place. If you're working with an individual, you can't program it. It's only made to measure, right? And I'll say what I see over and over again, what seems to be the big one. It's very simple. It's your deepest traumas. All of our deepest traumas are working through us, right? And you know them because they show up in your life as repetition. So whatever keeps occurring in our lives that brings conflict, that brings unhappiness, it could be something as simple as, it's at this point in my life, it's shocking that people go through their lives, I mean, day after day, week after week, month after month, with anxiety.
Right.
I mean, like day after day after day, they're just like constantly anxious. Like I hear this, and at this point, I'm like just baffled and heartbroken. Wait, you're telling me that you're pretty much feeling anxious or you're in terror or you're in fear or you're angry like all the time? It's like, yeah, until I get to like 6 p.m. and I have a couple of drinks, or if I go out with my friends, or if I do some gaming, or if I do these kinds of things, right? All the ways in which the capitalist system monetizes our dysfunction, which is our inability to complete the sequence, right? So that's kind of back.
No, but let's go back to, because I think we've jumped ahead a lot. Some people come on a little late, and let's go back to the sequence to just kind of reiterate that the sequence, as you're saying, is we have a feeling as a child that we don't know how, that's uncomfortable. Our parents don't know what to do with it because they've never dealt with it. So we're stuck with that uncomfortability until we find like maybe food, maybe candy, maybe playing video games, maybe sports, maybe then drugs, alcohol, sex, all that, anything that will break the sequence of feeling. But let's go back. How do we get to deal with it without those escapes?
So how would you like to do it? I can go through the parts. Remember, the parts, the systems, the processes. That's going to be more comprehensive, but it's going to be more boring. Or we can go to just the hot button. And the hot button is what you're talking about, which is our trauma, right? We all have trauma in various ways, and these are the processes. We can talk about the processes, but where it really starts to work is where the processes are embedded in the systems. And the systems, we understand how to work the systems because you understand the parts. You understand the steering wheel, you know there's a stick shift, you're trying to get to A to B. You don't care about the stick shift or even the radio or the windows or the air, you don't care. You want to get from A to B, but you get from A to B really, really well if you understand the steering wheel and the stick shift and the speedometer. So
Well,
which way
I'm interested. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that boring to look at the parts, and we have as many weeks as we are quarantined to do it, or maybe longer. So I don't think it has to be boring either. So, so you're saying if you lay out the parts, the people watching will have a more complete system to deal with this process. Because if they just get the punchline, it's another like, oh, I got it. All you have to do is chop wood and carry water. So let's go through.
This is why you're such a good interviewer, Alan. Because what I'm realizing now as you're asking this, I'm realizing why it's so important to do the parts. Because over the years, I've worked with individuals. And let's say you work with one person and they come in every time they come in about a fear, right? And you work them through the sequence, right? The process. You work them through the process. We untangle it. We get to resolution. Oh, I'm so glad this was great. Thank you so much. But you never address the parts, and you certainly don't address the systems. Then they go home, and the whole process starts. They're trying to get from A to Z again. But they don't know what the steering wheel is. They don't know what the gear stick is. They're hot. But all these dials over here, like we never addressed that because we only did the process. So now they have to call up Zach or someone else again. And once again, they're reliant upon the system, and all of their self-sovereignty is completely unloaded once again onto someone else. Just like a kind of a fossil fuel, you know, you got to externalize it. It's foreign aid, it's foreign oil. And so what I think your question really illuminated to me was when we go through the process, when people try to do it on their own, they'll get interrupted at some point during the sequence because they don't know the parts and they don't know how to work the systems. So that's what's great about good questions that I hadn't even thought about, like that particular element of it. But so the idea is that we start with the parts, and you got to get the parts down. It's almost like, you know, Karate Kid when he's like, just wax the car. And he's like, why? It's repetitive, it's simple, it's stupid. Just wax the damn car.
And it builds the muscles. So by going through what you're calling the parts, because they're not just parts, because they're all connected and they're all fractals really than parts, because they're all holistically reflecting the self, the problems of the self. So each piece gives us another piece of ourselves. So so maybe we shouldn't call them parts.
How about this? Why don't we go through, you know, if we're going to hang out, you know, it's funny, every time I talk to you, I enjoy myself so much. I forget we're in quarantine and like, this is like a global pandemic. I'm just having a whale of a time with Alan. But if we're going to keep talking, why don't we just start by, we can go through a really casual version of the course I'll do. And if people like it, they can check it out. But like, you know, because
that's great. No, that's a great way to advertise your course, and
people
also
are really interested, right? They can go deeper.
Help people in the process. So it's not just like a commercial for your course. I don't want it to be that, which is okay, but I'd like for people to have something useful instead of just saying, oh, I live with monks, or I've chopped wood, or whatever people are saying, to think that they're beyond this wounded, well, I don't want to be cliche, but wounded child that has never, that's why they're on YouTube now, because they rather watch something else. I'm not saying you should stop watching who's ever out there, but you know, we have endless distractions, and you know, I think quarantining ourselves, we get to look at all the places we turn away from self. I'm not saying you should shut off the channel right now and stop watching. I'm just, or if you want to, of course, that might be the best therapy. Just sit with yourself.
Well, you know, to speak to that, I agree with you, Ellen. Like, I'm not interested in advertising. I think you know, it's a terrible, terrible business right now. You know, the marketing manipulation that takes place. However, we're going to have to buy our way into the new world. You know, the new world that we want to create.
I don't know what that means.
What that means is, you know, if you want to stop, you know, funding, you know, let's say, you know, big agriculture, you have to buy seeds, and you have to buy, you know, garden beds, and you have to put the time and the resources into building your own garden. It doesn't just happen magically. You can't just ignore big ag and hope that suddenly you're going to feed. You have to actually pay for the new world. The new world has to be paid for. So we are surrounded by this false scaffolding, the synthetic ways that we are never really truly satisfied, and they are incredible at gaining our attention and gaining our money. And we have to basically disconnect from all of that. But we then will have to actually fund the world that we want. It's not going to just happen by freely, because in fact, the world that we want is the most underfunded thing around. It's the least funded there is. So we do have to actually give to it. So that being said, why don't we start with something? Let's start with what I think is how I'll start the course is the most important parts. And maybe you'll like this.
No, yeah, I'm interested in the course. How long is the course? Like a 7-week course where
it's going to be like a few months.
Okay, well, let's go through it, and then if people want to like do it more, I'll give them the website and they really dive in. But I'm curious.
And I think you'll like this. So this is how I've decided to start it, right? If you think about it, if you're going on a journey of transformation, and if you're going on a heroic quest of, in the Greek term, katabasis, which is into the underworld, into your own personal underworld, what would be the first most important thing you would need to hardwire? And I'll tell you, right?
Okay.
You need to hardwire first and foremost, before anything. What are you going to hold on to give you strength when it gets tough?
That's the first thing you have to hardwire. As a prerequisite, I'm just asking before we even hold on to something, the object of the course is to discover within ourselves that process that frees us from the ego distractions. Would you say that is what the ultimate goal of the course is?
I mean, that's one way of putting it. The process is really, it's for people who really want to understand every important system within them at the internal, energetic, psychological, emotional, and spiritual level, and have it panned out, right, in a blueprint that you can reference, that you can see, and that you can understand how to work all the things that come up, the main processes that come up in terms of emotional, spiritual, psychological, and they're all there. And we're going to go through every single step of the main ones that have been established since.
Okay, just tell me what for. Just bottom line it. Why? Why are we doing this? What is it? Yes, we'll get all these, but what? Healing. Okay. Healing of
our collective psychosis.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Is that a good enough answer? I mean, is there something else that's more important for us to do as a species?
Well, individual psychosis, but of course it's collective, it's the collective psychosis, yeah. And we're all in the psychosis. Even if you think you're spiritual, you're even more in the psychosis than everyone because we think we know the answer. There is no answer to know. But anyway.
Well, it's a tough pill to swallow, but I really wonder, and I say this with a lot of care and compassion, but one has to wonder about what's been going on with the spiritual world recently, where on the one hand, so many great individuals are doing really wonderful work, but on the other, we're modeling a lot of dysfunctional behavior around getting likes, getting more views, doing larger and larger things, you know, kind of exposing ourselves more and more and more and more. I find that when real healing begins to happen, you know, as you well know, and you know, you had told me long ago, you become a little more quiet. You know, you're not reaching as much anymore. You know, it's kind of the Instagram world and the social media world and all these things. It's like there's a certain
That is endless. That's endless. Oh, before we're going to go to the first part of your toolbox, but someone just wants us to, maybe tuned in late, wants us to reintroduce ourselves. I'm Alan Steinfeld, host of New Realities. You can go and subscribe to this channel, see a bunch of interviews, including last week with Zachary. When you talked about your office, Zachary, what is it that you do? Who are you, and what's your qualifications and job?
Well, what I've been, you know, and I don't like to go into this either, because I think we're kind of in a pandemic right now of the world where everyone is front loading and persuading everyone with qualifications and with credibility. It's like we have to talk about credibility at all times. And I find there are a lot of people out there who have all the qualifications in the world and no credibility whatsoever. And there are also a lot of people who have no qualifications whatsoever, and they're the ones getting the results. So we have to be very careful of stepping into that world where I'm invited, right, to try to earn someone's trust by reeling off what might be either conventional qualifications or non-conventional qualifications. And according to that array that I present, either it gets through their particular idiosyncratic filter bubble or not. And I'm not sure if I like to play that game.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. We don't want to fit into any corporate official system that says you're qualified, you're not.
What we're doing is we're completely, when we do that, we're telling the person that they're able to abdicate their ability to judge what they're hearing to be true or not. They're abdicating their own judicious circumspection.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You're absolutely right. Why don't you be judged on what you're saying as opposed to what you've done in the past? Okay, so if we're going on a dangerous journey or a journey, then let's start there. Like what you were about to tell us, you know, the basics here. Can you start over again with that?
Yeah, the first basic, and I think pretty much everyone would agree with this, and the way I say it, it's really the sun and the moon of energetic spiritual practice. Awareness and the heart. Awareness is the moon, right? And the heart is the sun. I first got introduced to the power of the energetic heart, located in the center of the chest, from some wonderful Sufi organizational business consultants in Portland. And I'd never really understood the true deep nature of the energetic heart, which was amazing because I was already in my early 30s at that time. And if you'd asked me if I was in my heart, I would have said, of course. And I think other people close to me would have agreed. There's a really just profound energetic reality to the heart, right? Awareness is much more commonplace. I mean, mindfulness revolution is on Time magazine. So everyone understands mindfulness, but at some point, anybody who's interested in this journey, you have to put your stake in the ground with either the heart or awareness or both. Because when everything really gets tough, you need to have an embodied ability to appreciate what I would say is that masculine, right? The blue god and all of the iconography of Buddhism that is impervious and stares ahead through the fire. You need to be able to recede back into awareness to some degree where you feel equanimity and peace and tranquility, or you need to step into the all-consuming divine feminine of the heart, the energetic heart, not as some intellectual idea, but as an embodied state that will radiate love out of you, right? And that's a skill that you can hone. And if you haven't honed it, then I would invite you to try that. And that would be part one.
Well, you're still being okay, but you haven't really given me anything.
You want to go deeper? You want a step by step on that?
Well, yeah, because you just named awareness, the heart, that's great. We all know that, but you haven't given me anything to hold on to. It's like, okay, got that. I'm still lost. You have not
Okay.
giving me anything. I want something to hold on to.
So we'll go through it then. So, you know,
Good.
we take a deep breath.
Okay.
There you go. And of course, you know, you're an old hat at this, Alan, but for those who are listening.
No, you can never be beyond a deep breath. If you are, then you're tall.
That's why you're a great teacher, Alan, because you can say that from this place. I mean, really, having gone through what you've gone through, and to say that is pretty exquisite.
I don't know what I've gone through. I'm just endlessly curious if you want to know.
Yeah.
So
But
so tell me.
thank you for basically, you're saying to me, give me a guided step by step, which is part of what the course is all about. But thank you for bringing me back into the step by step and not just simply offering signifiers and then telling people to go off and find their way. All right, well, here it is. Here's the step by step. We all take a deep breath and you bring your awareness into the body. There are going to be lots of things in the body. There are going to be sensations. There are going to be emotions. For a lot of us, there might be voices in the head, right? Those are all different systems that are moving and doing their thing. But if we just kind of bring our attention, let's say like a few inches behind the eyes, there's this space that you can tap into, right? It's kind of the origin of the third eye, right? What is the third eye? It's that projector screen of awareness. Go to the core of the projector screen. Go to the place where the light emanates. And what you feel is a space of awareness. And we can have a relationship to that space of awareness, and it can evolve over time.
Oh, wait, you're going too fast. Wait, let me just absorb that. I take a breath. I close my eyes. And I did this when I was a child because you touched upon something. I had insomnia. I was sort of a hyperactive, like 2-year-old, and I couldn't fall asleep at night. I was up all night long until I would close my eyes and just stare ahead towards my third eye. I guess that's what it was. And in that, there was a transcendence that took and then what you're saying there, I developed a relationship with that. So yeah, thank you for reminding me. So develop a relationship with your own aspects of consciousness, I think is what
Exactly.
you mean, right?
So this would be, I would probably call, these would be the two first parts. So start with awareness. The idea is, any mindfulness meditation, but I particularly like focusing on awareness. That always worked for me, like with you. It was just, I loved it. And
when you say awareness, what is the awareness that you're aware of? That's not a ridiculous question. What awareness?
We're going to get into really, deep, nuanced, granular, spiritual technologies here, if you can call it that. But it's where awareness emanates from appears to be somewhere behind the eyes, right? And then, so for example, we can focus on our left big toe right here, right now. There's the big toe. You can focus on your right elbow. Oh, the right elbow just appeared. There it is. Hi, right elbow. Right. The projector screen that is becoming aware of those parts of our body emanates from somewhere in particular. And it seems to be, right, somewhere behind the eyes. And the relationship that we can develop with what I would call this, moon of awareness, moon of consciousness, right? It's that light of the moon that the Zen tradition spoke of. The more we focus on that, we can actually kind of dissolve into it, and we can actually feel equanimity from it. Peace can bleed from that place into our bodies, right? This is the basis of.
I don't want to go contradict what you're saying, but there's also, we don't want to lose the somatic awareness either, because there is somatic awareness in your big toe, in your left elbow. There's just as much awareness. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Keep going.
And once again, if we don't have a good anchor in either awareness or the energetic part, when we start going into the soma, we're going to freak out and we're going to start backpedaling.
Okay, so we have awareness. What that means, some sense of presence, I would define it as awareness. You can only be aware in the present moment. You can't be aware
Yeah.
of yesterday. That's memory. You're only aware right now. That's awareness. Right here, right now, right this. That's awareness.
It's timeless, it's ever present, it's forever filled with peace and equanimity. It's the ultimate refuge that has been handed down to us from some of the greatest wisdom traditions going back to the Buddha and before. I mean, it's the
Right.
ultimate, you know? The second practice we give people, and we can kind of end there for today, I think this is pretty great, I enjoyed myself, is checking in with the heart. And the key is you have to do these practices. You have to be a scientist about it, which means you have to actually do the experiment. So the second practice would be,
Okay.
and the way I would invite people to do this is, I give you kind of the training wheels version of it, right? Which is, I don't say that with disparagement, right? I say that as, let's make it as easy as possible. I mean, life is hard enough as it is. Let's make these practices very easy. So what I do is choose a word that represents something greater than yourself, that you feel you can call upon in times of challenge, right? Just a resonance. You don't have to
Well,
share.
someone mentioned prayer in the chat.
Yeah,
Someone
perfect.
mentioned, okay,
Perfect.
I like
It can be religious, it can be non-religious, it can be like love, Jesus, nature, the trees, spirit. I mean, whatever. It could be courage. Choose a word and you'll know if it's the right word, and you can change it if it's not. But choose a word that really that you can use like a kind of mantra, right? When things get difficult, and you can hold on to that, and it can bring you strength, courage, peace, all of it. Once you've chosen that, take a deep breath. Okay? Then begin by bringing your awareness into your biological heart on the left side of your chest. Right? The biological heart is the antechamber of the energetic heart. Okay? Why is that? Because the biological heart physically beats, which is a more perceptible sense than the movement of the energetic heart. So we start there because it's easier to feel. And so the invitation is start by feeling the beat of the physical heart. And I would say you'd be amazed how many people can't even do that. And that takes them days, if not weeks. They're so disembodied as a result of our culture and everything that we've been talking about. They can't even feel the beat of their heart. So we start there. And what you'll notice is the more you start to feel the beat of your heart, the more you'll start to feel the pump of blood in the shoulder girdle, in the arms, in the chest, all the way down to the hands, right? That's the interest. That's where we're entering into the underworld here. But we're going first to the place which gives us strength and solace and all of that good stuff. So once you've felt the beat of the biological heart and you have your word, right, you're beginning to somatize yourself. Then slowly bring your awareness into the center of the chest, which is the location of the energetic heart. And then ever so delicately, internally whisper the mantra of that word that you chose into the energetic heart. Actually push that word into the energetic heart. And just keep doing that and notice what happens if you diligently generate, right, and guide that energy that is so valuable and important to you into the energetic heart. And of course, what you'll notice is that it begins to light up.
Oh, nice.
And that's just the beginning.
All right. Well, so we're going to practice this if people want to over the next week. We'll return same place, same time, 3 p.m. East Coast time. But let me just state we're doing this like you're giving us a real baby step by step process here, and we're doing it for what reason again? How does this help us with the disconnect of the child that never got to feel those feelings. That's the goal here, right?
Yeah. So the simple answer is we need to be able to feel peace in our lives, and we need to be able to have lives that are healed and healing, right? And to actually bring it to a more macro level, I actually relate all of this to our dependency on foreign fossil fuels. It's the same thing, right? We're bringing renewable resources home to ourselves that we can access at all times so that we don't have to go somewhere else and create collateral damage in a way that never really truly heals the root over and over and over again in a Sisyphusian loop. So it's about, it's actually, and I actually believe that this is one of the resistances that we have to, like, you know, the Paris Climate Accords at the global level, is that we're actually not willing to bring our renewable resources home internally and to complete, right, these processes on our
What
own.
are our renewable resources? What are they?
Well, feeling peace and equanimity by connecting to your heart, by connecting to awareness, by then connecting to someone else who's close to you and actually turning that in a co-heart habitational way and co-awareness, and
You're
then
saying
support.
feeling peace is a renewable resource,
If you're able to
like
do it on your own
breathe.
without, if you're able to do it on your own without hassling your wife for it, or without, like, you know, pathologically calling up your son or your daughter and saying, you know, hang out with me, you know, tell me how your day was. Would you tell me how your day was again? Call me tomorrow. Call me tomorrow. Or, you know, the corporate environment where it's like constantly going for the raise and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. I think a lot of these things would actually be curtailed if we were able to actually heal ourselves in the internal endogenous ways that the body actually has always wanted to do, getting back to our original conversation about the child. If the child is able to get their food from their garden at home, they don't need to fund big ag.
Right.
That's what we're talking about.
So, yeah, I mean, we're talking about the big problem starting with the core individual that
Or
becomes dysfunctional within the culture, that creates a dysfunctional culture, that creates a pandemic, that
we're stopping,
creates,
yeah, we're stopping
yeah.
fighting with the tech support guy, and we're actually addressing the bugs at the central processing unit. It's another metaphor for you.
Right, so you're going to lay, how many different aspects are you going to lay out over the next maybe few weeks? How many parts are there?
I don't know. We're going to explore it, Alan. I mean, the course is laid out in a very specific way, but with us, we can play with it. You know, we can play with it in a kind of casual way.
Well, not just
See if
with
you like it.
me, with people listening, but also if they want to register for the real course, this is sort of like the Cliff Note version.
Yeah,
How do they find you?
they can click on the link below,
What is
and
the link below? Wait, I didn't put the link in there. Tell me the
I think
link.
you had the link in the last time. And there's going to be a little statement, and
Okay.
I'll make sure you have it. There's going to be a little place where it says, if you're interested in this course, you know, put your email here, and all we'll do is we'll send you the update of when it's going to show up. So we'll send you the update of when you can register. We're pre-registering now. So all we're wanting to know is who's interested. And that's all we're doing. And then once we're ready to launch it, you'll get an email and you're not going to get spammed with anything else.
Right. Okay, so you're going to lay out, though, for us here watching, the maps of consciousness, so we will be able to at least have a
Yeah.
code to notice our disconnection. I mean, because we all notice it. It's just like you're helping us, or you're pointing a way. It's another approach that hopefully won't be another spiritual materialistic like banner to put on the wall like I graduated from Reiki class, you know.
Oh, God.
It'll it'll be a
Well,
useful tool.
yeah, it's, you know, well, you know, I've had a very maverick path, and, you know, my qualifications are very varied, but like we were talking before, you know, the only thing that has allowed me to create a business that has, you know, supported my family are my results.
Right.
You know, I
Right.
don't do marketing. You know, I mean, this
No,
is
no, I really
representative.
appreciate the thought. The thought you put into creating this course is the revelation of your own process of untangling the pain and desperation of looking outside. And I know it's taken you, well, since I've known you, how long that's been? That's been about
2
15
decades,
years or something,
15 years.
decade. Your own inner awareness and looking at it piece by piece, which you went to kicking and screaming like we all do,
Yeah.
until you finally got in and you say, oh, I can dismantle these aggravated ideas, and it doesn't have to be this way, I think is something you've said. And because it doesn't have to be this way, I know I can find a way where I can make it all right. And it's a work in progress. But you've taken really good notes on the dismantling of your own ego mind. That's what I can say to you. And so you're sharing your notes with us.
Well, I really appreciate that, Alan. And I just appreciate everything that you've given to me in my life. You know, we've been
Oh.
friends for a really long time now. We've been through a lot together. We've got a lot of great stories, and you've been instrumental since the beginning. You know, you carved
Since
away
before the beginning, Zachary, before the beginning, when you saw,
since the beginning of no time. You know, since
I'm just saying, when you saw me on video when you were in the south of France and you were watching the YouTubes, and
yeah,
that's what you told me.
for anyone who wants like the artifacts of our relationship, there was young Zachary sitting on a chair of fire meditating, and eventually finding himself to Alan Steinfeld videos. I mean, a long time ago, and just thinking, I love this guy. I love this guy.
Yeah, yeah. But tell me, what were you going through? Because that was the beginning of your journey. What was it that you were feeling that you were even looking for videos to work with?
This was like the biggest pink elephant in the world. It's like, why isn't anyone, where's the manual for actual solving our problems? You know, and it's like, okay, we've got some of the major religions, and even 15 years ago, let's not forget, I mean, it wasn't, the internet was not what it is today. The personal development and spiritual development has kind of exploded, but back then you were still reading books to get through stuff, not watching YouTube videos and blogs. But I was looking to say, like, I was still baffled that no one had done what we're talking about here. I was still baffled that most of the guidance that I had been told and I had followed sounded like riddles, sounded like allegory. We're very basic, we're very piecemeal, and also we're very disparate. Like, you went to one person for the meditation, you went to someone else for the psychotherapy, you went to a somatic practitioner for the emotional stuff. If you wanted to talk to angels or do something else, you had to do something else. It's like it just went on and on and on. My big issue was, why hasn't anyone synthesized this into one human manual to find some inner peace, to evacuate some of your trauma, and actually support the birth of a healthier planet that isn't going to happen without it? It's not going to happen without it.
Right,
So
right.
that gave birth to it.
Oh, but you were also, I mean, I just you were also not even sure what you were looking for. I would
No,
guess you were just feeling the inner resistance, and you said, and you started to look. So it's not like you were even asking, why isn't there a map? You just, like everyone, was saying, I know there's something more.
like everybody,
Still asking.
I was in
Well,
pain.
you were in pain.
I was in pain, and
You were
I
in
wanted my
pain.
pain to go away.
Right. And you didn't want to take drugs or because that didn't work, because the pain comes back.
And I never tried really hard drugs, but I tried enough to realize this isn't going to work either.
Right. So you decided to watch YouTube videos to see if there was some relief. And then, just one more question. When did you discover that there was a map that you could get into the toolbox of your own psyche to start to repair the being?
I didn't. And actually, this might be either another presentational video that we do before the course, or it might be the beginning of the course, but I have been obsessed with maps since the very beginning. And I looked for maps, I didn't find them. I found, if you look for maps of the psyche, you'll find the Buddhist mandala, not very helpful. I mean, beautiful, definitely has some meaning to it, but not very helpful when you're in pain, sitting on your own, trying to find your way out of it. I found, like Plato's De Anima, not very helpful. Even, Freud's map, not very helpful. Jung's map, not that helpful. Nothing, no made to measure step-by-step process. And I will, tip my hat and offer a deep bow to my mother, because I said to her, who's out there? She had been on the journey before me. She was the one who,
Right.
inaugurated my entire spiritual awakening, both she and my father.
She was Osho. She was part of the Osho thing and all those
Well,
other.
a
Not
little bit.
so much. Right.
We won't get into all of it, but she really traversed the New Age and a lot of the spiritual traditions. And,
Right.
my dad was into Zen and she was into a lot of different things. She was with Shivananda and, at some point, and
Right.
I mean, you name it, they traversed it. And at some point I turned to her and I said, who should I be looking to? And I think she was the one who said, check out the chairman of the Galactic Council, Alan Steinfeld. He knows what's going on, and he doesn't take any BS. And so I think she was the one. She gave me, she said, like, you can look at Andrew Cohen, he went down in flames. Look at some of the gurus, look at this, look at that guy, look at Alan Watts, look at Alan Steinfeld. And you were one of the few ones who was really going out there just kind of charting a course into the unknown, just like going as far as deep as you could. And you were really great at giving subtle signals around, what probably had legs and maybe what didn't. And that was extremely helpful for those of us who were really looking and searching.
Well, thanks for that. I just want to ask you, did you know there, thank you for saying that. What, did you know the map, or did you intuit that there must be a way through the psyche? Or were you just kind of hacking your way through the wilderness without knowing what direction to go?
That's a great question. You know what I really believed, Alan, and I think a lot of us believe this. I actually believed there was a singular path to enlightenment. And once you hit enlightenment, that was it. It was the end. And, my mother joked about this after the fact. She said, oh yeah, everyone thought that in the yoga traditions, like back in the 60s, everyone was like, oh yeah, I'm going to meditate for 6 years and I'll be enlightened and it'll be great. And even Andrew Cohen, and I love to say this because I have a lot of respect for Andrew, even though he did go down in flames and his organization imploded, but he really did some fabulous stuff at the time. But what's really interesting for me now, looking back, was, and I'll explain this for people who don't know that entire spiritual lineage, right? But if you remember, he pioneered evolutionary enlightenment, which means enlightenment that never ends. It's just like evolution. It goes more and more complex as time goes on. But if you go back to the first edition of the magazine that he put out, called What is Enlightenment, back in the early 80s, the first article and the first paragraph of that article in the first edition said, enlightenment is the end of evolution. Nothing more comes after it. And isn't that just amazing that even someone who's, been, he spiritual teacher since he was like 25, he got it so horrendously wrong in his inaugural magazine, saying that like, it's the end. And then 20 years later said, oh, no. Never went back and corrected that, just said, oh, no. There's no end. So even we can see his evolution. And so to answer your question, I thought there was something you did and it was the end. And right. I went for it. And of course, discovered that was true.
I mean, there's a book called Halfway Up the Mountain about people who think they've been enlightened and they think they've arrived where there's no place to arrive. Like Ram Dass said, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your parents and then you'll see how enlightened you are. So I agree with the process of ongoing moment to moment, but then you do get to a place where Paul Lowe is. Did you see the interview I did with him?
I loved it.
Paul, he's in a place where he's so, I would say practiced, but he probably wouldn't call it that, just so used to being present that he wouldn't even call that he wouldn't call that anything. He'd just call it, the trees are vibrating, that kind of thing.
So I'll say, we could talk about what Paul said there. Paul said something really beautiful on that interview you did.
Yeah.
And I really thought it was fascinating and lovely and beautiful, and I sat with it. But just to contextualize like what you're asking in a way, at least what I believe you're asking, is that for me, right, as someone who's been really with the spiritual journey since I was a child through my parents and watching and understanding, I think we really shot the rocket ship up to transcendence in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. We shot as far out as we could go. And I think this next chapter that we're going to be exploring, which with all due respect to a lot of the new age have been reluctant to step into, is we're going to go back into the soma. We're going to go back into the underworld because we discovered that we could only go as far out as we've gone far in. There's a
Right.
ceiling, and the ceiling is the depth
Yeah.
of the roots that we've entered into.
And it's so important to honor the body because it is the temple, not to be cliche, but we need to somatize experience so we don't get lost in the new age ideas, because it's only real right here, right at home, inside the earth we're living inside of. You know,
Yeah.
we're living inside the earth itself, and we
Yeah.
need to bring it here. We need to ground it into experience, whatever the practical applications of the map of consciousness is, which ultimately will be the avoidance of the distractions, because the distractions take the form of physicality that numbs our mind and our body. The presence, the feeling of the presence is going back home to all that is the embodiment of the self. I mean, people have tried to disconnect the mind and the body, the spirit and the soma, and we need to spiritualize the body with the
Yeah.
honor of the incarnation. You know, just
Yeah.
reminds me of the conversation I had with Ram Dass when I said to him, "Has it been a good incarnation?" I said to Ram Dass. He said it was an okay incarnation. It was this. It could have been that incarnation. But he said to me, "Has it been a good incarnation?" I said, "Absolutely." You know, because it's good. It's good because this is the transformational point that we're in. This is why the quarantine has given us back to ourselves, I feel, in a really practical way.
You know,
So,
one of the things that you're drawing out of me here is when, when you say like, what's this all for, which is one of the most important questions. And like, yes, we're trying to build a better world. Yes, we're
okay.
trying to feel peace. Yes, we're trying to heal. But at the core, what really comes down to, and you're saying it, it's honing the ability to give and receive love, you know, in a more
I don't, I mean,
tangible.
I like it, but that word, that's been used so long, that sense of
Is
that
the word love
phrase,
cliche?
it's not cliche, but I don't know what you mean or what people mean. I know what I mean by that, but I don't I don't want to say that's not a bad thing to say, giving a sense of love, but I'm not sure. I think it's been overused. I think it's great. I think I know what you mean, but I think there has to be a more visceral way
A better
of
zinger,
saying what?
a
What
better
is
zinger.
that? No, not a zinger, just a better way we can connect in with what you're intending to what
You know,
your intent and meaning is.
we may need to have better language for it, but it, for me, it comes down to like what I love you're bringing out in this final piece here is, where does the rubber hit the road with this? Where does this become as practical as everything? And it's
Yes.
for me, it is about being in communion with another person or many other people and feeling, a bliss state, feeling a bliss state and feeling that everything is wonderful and there are no little tiny traumas that are upsetting me and projecting onto you and getting in the way of just, our nervous systems. every time we are with someone, our nervous systems begin to interact. And if your nervous system has a bunch of junk in it that hasn't been affected, then that affects our ability to commune. So the more that we unpack all of this stuff, the smoother that energetic process of communion gets. And the smoother it gets, the more enjoyable it is, and the more relaxing it is, and the healthier it is, because our nervous system grounds. The more into rest and digest we fall. So that's why also, this comes out of the work that I've done over the past 5 years with the chronic illness community, because all of this is really about grounding the nervous system, like to actually be able, can you sit in peace in a way where you're eating cancer cells? Can you do that manually? Because we'd love you to. It would be great
And
if you could
you help people do that.
Yeah, I mean, I've helped a lot of, part of my practice was working with totally dysregulated nervous systems.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm happy you're here the next couple of weeks to go deeper into the maps of consciousness. And
it's so lovely to talk with you, Alan.
Yeah, I'd like to also get into family constellation work a little bit. I mean, if that's part of your map of consciousness.
Yeah, I use that. I use that a bunch. Yeah.
I think that's a really good skill. Maybe authentically. I'm just looking at the chat. Who knows what other words we could use instead of love? I'm not saying love is a bad thing. I think we've lost our sense of it because I think it's like the word snow. The Eskimos have 17 words for the word snow. Also, the Greeks had different words for the word love. There was like agape, eros, philos. So I think in an evolutionary culture, we can start to make distinctions without losing that sense. Of course, there's raw sense of love, of course. Yes, it's like, it's when you're feeling it, the word hardly describes it in a sense,
Yeah.
But
and words
thank
create
you.
reality.
Yeah, but thank you for taking your time to be here and
Always
to talk to this audience. And so Zachary Fader, what's your website again?
I'm not going to give my website because they can just find me with you, but it's my name.
All right, just look them up, and I'll put some websites in the chat. I'm Alan Steinfeld, New Realities. Subscribe here, send us your chat, do whatever you want to, be part of this. So you are part of it if you're watching, and I'm happy you are. And there'll be more live streams coming up. I'm doing one on Wednesday with Doc Wallach. What else am I doing this week? Oh, Healing Salon Friday, 3 p.m. Also Friday, 1 p.m. Message with a Medium. And then next week, I'll be posting this. Thank you all for watching, and subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you next week. I'll be next week with Zachary, 3 p.m. East Coast time. I guess that is 12 p.m. West Coast, and figure out whatever's in the middle. Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you on chat for being
Thanks, everybody.
part
Love you,
of
Alan.
this too.